Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, welcome. Welcome to a lot of outsiders here today, which is great. Come on down and race with us on the weekends. So first of all, I think my brother Brad is watching this from somewhere out in the middle of the, like Bahama Banks or something like that. So we have to blame this all on him to start with. He was the guy that started this thing during the pandemic. I was just talking to Billy Lynn up in Marblehead. A lot of these things started during COVID, and it's exceptional that it has carried on. And it's carried on because of the atmosphere. It's pretty low key. This is as intense as we get, hopefully. We have to be careful, like as we get websites and become more organized, that we don't lose the DNA of this. And the reason why I do it, and I think the reason why most other people do it, is because it's just good entertainment and fun, and it's quick and it's painless, and you get to go home and you throw your boat back in the basement and off you go. But with that said, we all like to do better. We all like to improve. We all like to feel like we're improving. And so that's what today's all about. Let's figure out how to improve a little bit. Now, in a way, it's kind of embarrassing for me to be up here because I'm guessing that there's a lot of people across the country, or maybe even around the world, that are going to watch this silly Facebook thing. Thank you, Buster, for setting me up here. But that I've been doing this a lot longer than I have, or that most of us have in this room. And I'm probably going to say some stuff that makes no sense to a lot of these quote experts, but this is essentially, this is what works for me. So I just want to preface this all today. This is what worked for me. I've handed out this, I don't know how, I can just send you a file later, maybe, and we can throw it up on however this thing is saved. But this is kind of our agenda for today. And this is what I think are the critical parts to setting up the boat. And as you can imagine, being in the industry that I'm in, not only tweaking little boats like this because it makes me happy. That's my happy place, is tweaking boats for some reason. It's understanding the concept. And so I think again, to preface this, if you understand the concept of how you're tuning your boat, you have much better chance of doing well. And I think that a lot of people get into measurements. You know, I see people, especially at this IOM regatta I did, everybody had their rulers out and they're looking at 3 millimeters here and twist 4 millimeters there. I don't see that. That would drive me personally insane to pull out a ruler and to be measuring all little things. I need to understand the concept and understand what you're trying to do. Is it choppy? Is it windy? Is it light? Whatever the course of action for the day. Are you in a mode that you want to be footing to the first shift all day? Is it a pinch? Is it a pinching, pointing day? Is the breeze going to build? Is the breeze going to die? Those are the things that I'm constantly thinking about, and how I like to set up the boat. And I set it up to feel. There's no question about it. I think the only thing I have ever measured on this boat is the headstay, is the rake measurement, which is where we're going to start, of course. Everything starts with rake. So you see boats coming here all the time and their mainsail is inverted or their mainsail is super deep and people pulling and tweaking on backstays and stuff like that. I'm guaranteeing that your rake is wrong. And if your rake, I measure my rake every single week. I measure it multiple times during the week just to get it in my brain. One thing I think is pretty advantageous. I'm a big believer in weather forecasts. So I actually set my boat up for the day's racing before I leave my house. So when I come down here and pull it out of the car, I'm 95% sure I'm going to be set up for that day. So that includes rake, backstay, twist, sheet tension, all the little stuff. You know, Jamie and I, the gimp over here, Jamie and I've been driving him down here for the last couple of months, and God, I hope it ends soon. But he gets in the car with his boat, and then his sails are in a bag. I couldn't do that. I have to be, when I get out of the truck here, I want to throw the boat in the water and be 95% sure that the balance is going to be right as per that condition. So I think I asked, hopefully a lot of people brought rake sticks. So the basic average rake is 1135. And we're gonna go through these things really quick. That's the rake that all the tuning guides have. So that's where I started. And just so everybody knows, we're doing it the same thing. I've kind of changed. I actually set my backstay before I do the rake now. I used to do it with no backstay. So essentially it's the back edge of that black bumper to the center of the hole up top, and mine is spot on 1135. So that's the basic rake that everybody goes off. And the reason why that is because it all has to do with the setup of the mast at the deck too. If you go further back than that, you're going to start lower bending the mast a little bit too much and probably inverting your mainsail a little too quick. And if you go further forward than that, that setup at the base of the mast at the deck level is going to make it off too. So combined with the rake at 1135, the mast at the deck level is all the way out. 100% of the time, I actually press on it because you're trying to get the mast. At the end of the day, you're trying to get the mast bend set up for the mainsail left curve. So those two things have to be right. So I've changed my philosophy this past year. I read a really good article by, I believe, the current world champion. And he actually is convinced that keeping the backstay pretty close to the same all the time and adjusting your forestay is a little more efficient. So I decided, what the heck, I'm open-minded, as my wife will tell you, I'm super open-minded. So I started doing that this year, and I've kind of turned into a bit of a hybrid of that concept. So let me explain. 1135 is what I consider my aft rake setting, right? Center of the hole to the aft edge of the bumper. And those of you, if you guys, while we're doing this, if you guys want to measure your boats and don't worry about the disruptions, but the whole point here is for us to leave here with your boat that much more effectively tuned. So if you have rake sticks or after I'm done here, you can borrow mine. Please go ahead and feel free to do some work while we're talking about it. So that's my aft rake measurement. I go about 3 mil further forward than that. I have a second mark up on that if it gets a little windier, or I think it's going to be kind of medium to top end of, this is the A rig, of course, the A rig. I'll actually go forward on the head stay now. And then what that does, it does a few things. It straightens out the mast down low. When it's straightening out the mast down low, it lets you put a little more bang on it without inverting the mainsail. Head stay gets tighter. Everything, a lot of really good things happen with it. So instead of just keeping the same rake measurement for that forestay measurement and just adjusting the backstay all the time, I'm actually going 1135 to about 1132 on the two different settings. Just two settings. Keep it simple. It's incredible how we can all, a couple of weeks ago, Tommy was going fast here, and it wouldn't have set. If I set my boat up the way you had it set up, I would have blown my head up. Couldn't believe it. And you were plenty fast that day. So there's a million ways to skin the cat. So anyway, 2 rakes, 1 backstay tension, and I can't help myself, but if it's a little lighter or a little heavier, I'll actually adjust the backstay. Remember, it's only 2 or 3 mil, right? 2 or 3 mil on a boat this size is like 1.5 feet on a 100-footer. So you got to realize that these tweaks, these little measurements we take one way or the other, it's incredibly small, which makes an incredibly big difference. So once we get through the rake and the mast step, again, mast step all the way aft all the time, never touch it. Let's go right down through the center of the boat. First of all, the bridle. I have my bridle loose, so it's almost, the ring is almost, you probably can't see this, the ring is up almost to boom level. It's like what we used to do on our 420s when we were kids. You're bang sheeting. So when you're bang sheeting, the last thing you want is that ring to be way down low. You want it right to be up in parallel with the boom going back and forth. You got to make sure that ring is in the center of the boat, which is obviously critical. And this is one of the few things that I glue. I glue the bridle bowsies because it seemed like every time I got in a collision, one of those bridles was off, and before you know it, I'm sailing a whole race with the mainsail way out on one side and way in on the other side. So I actually glue it, but getting that bridle up in the air as high as you can is really important. Main sheet and jib sheet on the boom are also, this is a trick that, and by the way, I would love to take credit for a lot of this stuff, but it's, in essence, I'm really good at copying people. And of course, these are a lot of most of these are tricks that I've learned from other people. My brother actually did some pretty good homework, and we did a session like this with Christ, that must have been what, 3 years ago, and learned a lot from him and others that day. One trick is where you put the main sheet and jib sheet positions on the booms. The jib sheet, if you can see, is well forward of the ringlet that it actually goes through. And the reason for that is it allows the jib to go out further downwind. So it's not straight over the top of that ringlet. It's actually well forward. It's about, let's call it a finger and a half forward of the ringlet. You want it to go further out downwind. And by the way, it's out compared to the boom. So I have the boom that goes out not quite to 90 degrees, and I'm trying to get the jib out to 90 degrees. I actually want the jib to be further forward than the mainsail goes out. It actually helps set up flow coming from the leech to the luff, going downwind when you're wing and wing. So anyway, that position on the boom of where the jib sheet goes, just slide it forward. A lot of people, are you allowed to glue it in place? You are?
Yes.
I think a lot of people glue it. I know you're not allowed to put a piece of tape for some reason, but you're allowed to glue it.
Rubber retainers that cover.
Okay. And then, and remember, you can adjust, and Jeff will probably explain this in a while. You can adjust your in out. So, on a windy day, you could actually just adjust on your transmitter, having this, only go out that far, or you can go out that far, or you can make it go out further on a course of a day. So the placement of those fittings on the booms are very important. The boom fitting is essentially dead nuts over top of the bottom. I don't see any reason to really alter that position. Sure.
I had a question with the line that goes through, doesn't pivot equally at the sides. This kind. Right here. So I think down in this side, it would be all the way over, and the other side, it's like vertical instead.
I would call Maggie and just ask for a warranty. Told him. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, I don't know. Mine does. One little trick I've developed is the rubber things on the end of the I never pinch the back one right up to the rings that hold the sails on, because it doesn't allow them to turn. So they just always sit loose almost off the end of the boom. But I've never seen that one. No, sorry.
I know that the people that advocate gluing those, that's their main reason. Said it's,
If you glue the one that pivots,
they say it's not, doesn't pivot consistently, so they'd rather get moved.
that's what they say to break.
So I, like many other people, used to have water problems inside the hull. And once you do that, you're kind of screwed, obviously, for a variety of reasons. And then I found out that a lot of these fittings on the decks are kind of loose, all the ringlets on the decks. As soon as I put a dab of epoxy into each of those ringlets, all around the boat, I have not had a single drop in the boat since then.
Did you remove the hardware?
No, just took the lazy way out, didn't sand it, didn't do anything, just dropped a little droplet of epoxy in every one of them. And it's just, make sure you don't fill it up, because it's kind of hard to get the string through from then on. But that's super handy, and it's absolutely, it absolutely works. So glue the bridle, we talked about that. Jib sheet. This is something I learned from reading that tuning guide from the world champion, is I've changed putting the jib sheet from the boom through both of the eyes rather than just one eye, because it actually does. If it's just through one eye, the jib is a little bit different from tack to tack. When you go through both eyes and you line them both up, the jib actually is the same trim from tack to tack. I never would have thought of that one. So somebody else thinks about this even more than I do. So it was very interesting to read. Main halyard setup. This is a big one that I think a lot of people struggle with. The boat the boat struggles with it. The beauty of this boat is its simplicity. The drawback of this boat is its simplicity, right? So you have the option of 2 holes that you can use in the back, in the top, in your mast crane. This is for the main halyard. Now, you can only use 1 hole, so you can't split it and have tension going fore and aft to 2 holes. I think, and by the way, Jim, if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense to the rules, please call me on it. But I believe I've read that in the past. So I actually have 3 holes up here, of which 1 I have filled in because I was trying different locations, and we all have seen it. When you turn to go downwind, especially, the top of your mainsail is all screwed, right? And that's all because of the positioning of this string. So first of all, I used to have it 2-to-1, and I now just have it 1-to-1, so it can swivel that much easier. 2-to-1 kind of held the large roach of the mainsail from going out very far. So it's 1-to-1, and it's right to the bottom of the silver band. If you try to go any tighter up, if you try to pull your main halyard up any further than the bottom of the metal band, it won't allow the top of the sail to pivot very well. It doesn't pivot very well to begin with, so you're trying your hardest to get it to pivot by keeping that distance as long as possible. And you've gone too long when your Cunningham's bottomed out. So I keep it as long as I can up here with just still a tiny bit of Cunningham movement at the bottom of the mast, so you can at least put a little bit of tension, enough to take the scallops out of the front of the mainsail if need be. So the second thing is, I think these are a lot of us, we did a fleet order to the Black Cat sails. I personally think there's a little too much luff curve in the top of these sails. So I actually let my little string at the top that holds the head of the mainsail to the mast, I actually have eased that off quite a bit. What that does is kind of take some of that luff curve problem out up in this area. And I actually I thought it was really interesting. I've read that, again, that world champion talking about it, he had a special set of sails made with 2 mil taken out of the top of the mainsail. I think if I did it again, I would probably ask for that. If take 2 mil out here, you add 2 mil to the leech, you're still using the sail area, but I think it sets up to the mast bend a little bit. So this is pretty far off, this fore and aft. The rest of them are pretty even for the most part, probably a little tighter on the top one compared to the bottom ones. All these little hoops that go around the mast, I don't know what they call them. Because again, I'm trying to get rid of luff curve here, so I have this one fairly tight. And especially the one down at the bottom where the bang really affects the bottom bend of the mast, I probably have that the loosest of the group as you went up and down. But it's something that you can kind of play with from week to week. They're easy to reset. I don't use the metal pieces because I think they're too constrictive, and I think a little bit of different distance from the sail to the mast is important. So that's the reason why I don't use those metal pieces anywhere. Plus, I look at metal and I just see weight, and I'm sure it doesn't make any difference, but it does to me. I can't sleep at night. Okay, so that's main luff ring setup. So max mast bend with this is, I see people, I think, again, in my opinion, making this mistake all the time. So we're all setting up our boats at the beginning of the day, and I see people, like the wind's blowing from the west, and they're sitting there holding up their sails, and the wind's blowing, and the mast is bending, and you can't judge your sail trim unless either A, you're in a building like this and there's not a breath of air, or if you have to make a change out on the water, you have to try to do it downwind and behind yourself, because the side mass forces when a boat is stationary and the wind is just hitting the boat statically are way more than when it's out sailing. When it's out sailing, it's actually releasing a lot of that load, especially side force load on the mast. So when you're looking at it and you're trying to figure out twists, you have to somehow try to protect this thing behind you if you have to do it out on the dock or in between races or something like that. Because if you try to do it just to the wind, it's going to look way over twisted. It looks all screwed up. So that's really important. And it's another reason why I tune the boat up before I leave my house, because It's just like here. Oh, that's good. Oh, wait, hang on. I've got about a half a mil. I'm going to ease here. The only way you can judge it is in a static, no wind situation like this, which is super, super important. Let's see. So I wasn't a believer in this until recently, but so once I switched to the method of two settings on the headstay, and in essence, one setting on the backstay, I wanted to learn where my max bend was. So stuck it on the floor, and you could actually sight it, and you can play with your with your backstay here, just with your finger, figure out that the mast bends a little more up top, a little more down low. It gives you a pretty good view, and you can also see when it starts to invert. So the whole goal here, these boats, for the most part, as we all know, are pretty overpowered little boats, right? So I'm gonna set my backstay too tight right now, and hopefully we can see. We've all seen the wrinkle, right? That's the inversion wrinkle. It goes to the back of the mast, usually kind of in this area. This is where the mast overbends first. We've all put our boat in the water. We've all gone sailing with it. We've all seen it a million times on other people's boats. I wonder when they're going to take the immersion out of their face. Well, that's because there's too much mast bend. But it's good to know when there is too much mast bend. It's pretty good to know. What does it look like? Well, fortunately, this is not a big boat, and you can actually look at it in your garage or in your basement or here at Sail Newport and figure out, wow, it's bending like crazy down low. It's just something to kind of calibrate in your own brain as to where you're going to make these marks. So I put a black mark, only a single black mark on my backstay where I think absolute max mass bend, just starting to invert the mainsail position, maybe just one single mark now. So I have two marks up here and I have one mark back here. Again, like I said, I'm probably give or take 2 or 3 mil in the back, just kind of adjusting it for the day. Might be a choppy day where I got a little less bang, so I'm going to let a little bit of backstay off, something like that. But anyway, I think it's really simplified. It also allows, if you're gonna, breeze is picking up, and I hate to do this in the course of a day, because once you find out the balance of the boat and whether you have weather or lee helm or not, you hate to make a big change on the dock. You know, if you're making big changes on the dock because your boat has radical lee helm or radical windward helm, you're probably kind of, excuse my French, you're kind of effed, you know, because unless you have really good marks. So I've worked hard at having a really good rake setting mark. Again, those 2 rake settings, the light and the heavy, and one really good backstay mark. So if I do have to change in the given day or kind of get a little lost, if the boat gets in a collision or whatever the case may be, I can get right back to where that position is. And so with the 2 here and the 1 here, there's really only one other variable that really comes into play, and that's the topping lift. The topping lift is that if you change the rake, you have to change the topping lift. If you change the topping lift, you're just on its own, you're fine tuning the twist. But when you make even a 2 or 3 mil change to the headstay, technically you don't have to change the backstay if you have it right. So I'm going from a light air setting to a heavy air setting. I'm shortening the headstay tension by about 3 mil. Technically, I'm set up. I'm pretty comfortable in mast bend to luff curve to backstay. I'm set up so I don't have to do anything other than just change the topping. So I have 2 positions, 2 marks on my topping lift, 2 marks on my headstay, 1 mark on my backstay. And if I'm feeling really out of balance or the breeze is really picked up or dropped in the course of a day, I'm pretty sure I can make a wholesale change in the 1.5 minutes between races, throw it back in the water, and be pretty darn close to being sorted for the next race. So once I got to that point of simplification, I tell you that it was kind of a game changer, because how many times you put it off the dock, you bring it back in quick, put it off the dock, and before you know it, you hear the damn speaker saying 28 seconds to the start, and you're tossing your boat in at the last second. I'm quite sure now I can set this thing up in 30 seconds for a complete wholesale change. So I would highly recommend kind of learning and understanding those principles of rig setup and making one mark per each, or 2 marks for the head stay, 2 marks for the topping lift, and 1 mark for the backstay. Again, you can fine tune, you can go a little bit on either side of it once you really start to understand the principles behind it, but those will get you pretty darn close to the in the ballpark. So for the most part, I actually learned this sailing against Jim a long time ago. Jim showed up when we were all rookies at this in super, super light air. And I set my rig up with head stay. I set it up like you'd be setting up your TP52 that day, right? And Jim just went out there with tons of twists. This is really light air, tons of twists, bone tight head stay, and sailed away from us all. So the head stay sag, I think for the most part, you could say you just never want it. If you see your head stay pumping at all, then something's wrong. Something's out of whack. You got too much rake. You got not enough backstay. Your mast step may not be in the right place. Something's wrong. So if you see your head stay pumping around, that's a telltale sign that something may be out of whack. Jib tack down in the Cunningham area. And again, I'm just rifling through all these things. We can talk about it later. I've seen some people raise the, what do you call this?
Jib tack.
Jib tack. Okay, there we go. So thanks, Jim. Jib tack position, it's a little up in the air right now because it's been on tight for the night. But I get that as close to the deck as I can. The only drawback of that is the sail doesn't wing and wing quite as easily, I feel, as if it's up in the air slightly. But I'm an end plate guy, so I'm trying to get the sails down as close to the hull as possible because I think the acceleration of breeze under the sail is far more than you could ever possibly realize. And I'm trying to get the sails as close to the deck as possible. Jib Cunningham all the way forward. I don't believe I've ever used it. I don't think I've ever pulled it on. And the reason being is, remember, these sails are bored flat, right? There are rules created to make sure they're flat. There's no broad seams. You're not allowed to have any left curve in the jib. The only shaping to the sail whatsoever is what the wind does is stretch, and also broad seam, left curve in the mainsail as it sets up to the mast. So I think if you over tension, I almost always have wrinkles off the luff of the jib because I think you're just, any shape that you're trying to get into the sail, you're helping eliminate it with the Jib Cunningham if you're not careful. So I've retuned some of your boats and I've flicked that piece of string right there and it's bone tight. That's probably 60% of your problem. So you need shape. Somehow you need to get shape. The only time I'd ever snug it up is if you're right at the top end of an A rig, you might actually possibly use it. But that's something I would strongly recommend that you just be careful because you're taking away shape from something that doesn't have any shape. So it's certainly a struggle. All right. So deck measurements, and some of you people, I started this with Brad because when Brad, my brother, actually set up my very first boat, and he put 3 marks on the deck for sheet locations, and you might think of it as light, medium, and heavy, but I think of it as balance, as windward lee helm, weather helm, lee helm, balance marks. So, like all sailors who sail modern boats, I was convinced from day one that I can pull the jib in tighter than anybody else because that's what you do again on your TP52 or your Cape 31 or any other boat. Well, it's unfortunately not the case. And I've been easing my jib out over the years to be out pretty close to where all the experts said you should have been in the first place. So funny enough, the people who know how to sail these boats were probably right. I have these 3 locations, and I didn't actually measure them, but I have a ruler up here. The only reason you need to measure mine is if we want to talk about it before or during a race. Jeff did this a while ago on his boat, and halfway through racing in the course of a day, he might be going fast or I'm going fast, and one of us can say to the other, "Hey, what are you on?" I'm on red. I'm red jib and I'm a green main here today, or I'm halfway between red and green. That's the only reason you should measure mine. Where those are is essentially irrelevant. It's that you know where they are and you start setting consistently up to those marks. So again, if I'm, as you know, I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about where my settings are on any time during a race or in between races or anything else. That's the only reason that if you're interested, come measure mine and we can talk about it before, during, or after racing. Essentially, what Brad did was put 3 marks and then took a ruler and drew a line from the tack fitting that the jib is set up at back through that mark, and that's where the cadence of the marks on the deck in both positions. Put 3 dots on the deck, drew a line straight to the gooseneck here, and those are the 3 positions there. All the way inside is black, middle is red, outside is green. I just like having, this is really the only place on the boat I think you need marks, because it's different from week to week, and it's a really easy way to be able to fine tune your sheets, again, to work on lee helm versus weather helm. So again, I got a ruler up here. If you want, I actually have 3 colored markers too, if you want to put them on your boat. It's totally up to you. I would just recommend having something, because I think it's really important from a consistency week to week, day to day, even race to race standpoint, that that you know where you're at. And again, once you learn it, once you learn the concept of, I have a little bit of lee helm here. We'll talk about the variables of if you have lee helm or if you have weather helm. But the sheeting, whether it's sheet in or sheet out, that's, somebody asked me last week, what's the first thing you go to if you have too much weather helm or too much lee helm? Well, the sheet's easiest. That's, what do you do on a regular boat? You use the main or you use the jib. You tighten the main or you tighten the jib. Helmsman says, I'm all loaded up, use the mainsail. So I think that's the #1 course tune way to actually get rid of lee helm or get rid of weather helm. But as we'll talk about in a second, unfortunately, there's about 10,000 inner variables at the same time. So that's a deck. Yeah.
So you got marked on the deck. What's it on? Sure.
So I always hear people talk about, it's a good question because I've never actually looked at it. So I would call that my medium mainsail setting. So where is that on? I don't know. Is the shear out here? I've seen people like put their hands up like this and say, go to the shear or something like that. One thing, it's kind of like glue in the fittings. Another trick, I think, when you're trying to figure out where you're sheeted for a particular time, I put a fair amount of load on it, because first of all, this little spectral line, believe it or not, shrinks and has a little bit of elasticity to it. So you try to take the elasticity out of it. You try to take the elasticity out of the system, like your little turning gooseneck piece. You try to take, so I actually put a fair chunk of pressure on it with my finger when I'm trying to adjust it. So I'm right in between a red green right now, and I would call that kind of medium-ish conditions. I used to be all the way in a condition like this when Brad and I first started, and I've just gone further and further out here. And same thing here. This is on red, which is right down the middle. Is it close to the rail? Yes, it might be close to the rail. This would be kind of an all-purpose setting. The reason to get slightly technical, but the reason why I was always freaked out about overusing the jib is because it's not just taking the jib leech clue off center line, but you're rotating the luff of the sail towards the wind. So very quickly you're taking away pointing ability. So it's one of the reasons why I really freaked out about sailing with the jib too far out, because the luff is turning around this pivot point, whereas on a normal boat, the pivot point stays the same in the front of the boat, and it's just the clue that's moving. Well, here it's a double-edged sword. You're not only losing back end, but you're losing front end to the wind at the same time. Turns out all those experts were right. So I've been sailing with it looser and looser. we'll talk about Jeff's stuff in a minute as to whether you actually think about putting two settings on your transmitter in order to have like a point mode and a sail fast mode. I kind of probably set my sheets up a little bit slightly tighter than right for the given day. And I just use my finger on the transmitter quite a bit. I'm in and out all the time going upwind. Others have, I think we'll talk about, others have switches where you flick a switch in one condition for a real tight setting or loose setting. Others use the little pieces, the little gauges, the micro tuning gauges compared to the macros here. So anyway, that's sheeting. That's your macro. That's your macro tuning ability. And I guess, Mike, to answer your question, I'd say the boom is slightly in from the gunnel and the jib is darn close to it. But again, I'm going to leave this up here. You guys can measure, you can tweak and have a look all you want when it's done. The other one is out haul. I used to be fanatical about out haul. And again, it might have been down against Tommy one day. You could have put 4 fingers in there. His sails were so deep. I didn't think it was like he was sailing around with a blooper. And all you young kids have no idea what a blooper is, but us old people know what a blooper is. So I stopped being so anal about it, to be honest. So I just use my fingers. I'm a between a 2-finger and a 1-finger guy, and on any given day, I'm a 1.5-finger guy. Finger and a half here and a 1.5-finger here. I almost, if I adjust one, I adjust the other. It's I don't know. I'm shocked. Not to equate it to the IOM class. The IOM class, some of these people never change their outhauls. They change everything else, but they never change their outhauls. So anyway, on a given day, it's anywhere, 2 on a light day and 1 on a breezy day and 1.5 somewhere in between, and call it a day. Hilton, I'm going to get you for that sooner or later. Okay, so that's outhauls. Another little trick. This falls under the glue your fittings category. I just started doing this. When your sheets go into the hook at the end, just wrap a little piece of tape around both sheets, because I'm sure we've all figured out at the end of the day or start of a day or whatever time of the day, it's the sheet itself, the loop on the sheet has found itself up into the little eyelet of the hook, and all of a sudden you were wondering why you were going slow all day. It's because your jib was trimmed in about that far from what was supposed to be. So I just put a little piece of tape around it to hold those sheets together right by the hook itself, and that prevents the loops from getting hooked anywhere but where they're supposed to be. What's that?
You just use that.
Yeah, this is the one that comes with it. You have some tricky hook thing?
Jeff uses a square hook, it doesn't have that.
Oh, yeah?
The quick clip fishing ones too are really nice.
Are they illegal?
I don't know.
The swivel ones are not.
They're not so.
Shell sheets.
Okay.
Hook these shell sheets isn't standard, right?
It's not standard. I'll try to find it.
Look at it.
So if anyone wants to look at my boat, I use turning on to me called micro tactical clips. You get them at any fishing store. And they're much easier to use than the little clips. So you just slide the sheet on. If you look at my boat, you'll notice that all my sheets are luggage tagged onto that. Because the one drawback is because the loop just slides onto the clip. In luffing pre-start conditions, twice I had the sheet fall out of it. So I started luggage tagging, they never happened again.
Or use the regular clip and put a little piece of tape on it.
Rigs, ice cold fingers.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a very fair thing. All right, so let's just talk about twist and bang setting. That's the next. So we're in a 1.5-finger medium setting, essentially red. So this is I read the forecast this morning. I'm expecting a 10 knot day. So I'm in my aft rake, red, same normal backstay. And so from, again, doing this in static conditions and finding out what the twist should be per sail this is where there's a lot of kind of winging it involved, right? There's been days where you go off the dock and like in that super light condition, Jim showed us that lots of twists for some reason really worked. Other days where pretty firm leach really works. We're leading up to weather helm, lee helm. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters here. But as you can see, both sails are going to be twisted in essence in unison. And it's nothing radical. It's nothing crazy. But so often I pull one of your boats out of the water and the jib looks like this. You guys are going to kick my ass today because I'm taking all my tuning away. So the jib looks like this. It just, the topping lift is way too tight. I think there's nothing slower on these boats than if the jib twist doesn't align with the mainsail. So anyway, that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid one leech being super tight and the other leech being nice and twisty, and the boat is automatically out of balance. You can guarantee that the boat will barely sail. We'll probably have tons of lee helm in the course of a day. All right, so I'm going to tighten this up a little bit. And then on the other hand, let's do this with the jib twist and main twist is also interesting. You think you got it right. One way actually that Brad talked about when Brad came back from one of those Texas events, he said people are fine tuning their twist going downwind, believe it or not. So you set the boat and you go upwind and everything looks pretty good when it's going upwind. It's hard to really judge from, because it's hard to get right directly behind your boat, right? Your boat rarely is sailing away from you. So he said a lot of the good sailors in the class turn downwind and judge their twist when the boat's going downwind. So you can really see it. If your mainsail's way twisty and open downwind as it sails by the dock in front of you, probably bring it in right away. Just put a little bit of bang on and start pulling. On the other hand, if you're going downwind and there's no give to your main sheet at all, and it's just bone tight, not only is that super, if there's any way to go slow downwind, that's the way to go slow. But it's just a telltale sign that you don't have enough twist. So it was kind of a fun trick to judge. So I'm going to go downwind. So, we've all been there, right? Downwind with way too much twist. The mainsail luff doesn't set up, just bring it in. And that's a really good way to keep bringing it in, keep adding bang until you get down to, I read from this guy who just won the Worlds, a half a turn on a bang is a lot. So that's kind of the fine tuning you should be getting yourself down to is that half turn. And I've even found a quarter turn every once in a while is a lot. So going downwind until you have a proper amount that's still probably overly twisty when you're going downwind. It's a really nice way at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, I should say, to judge where you should be twist wise and as your fine tune. To turn the boat downwind and the twist really shows up there, whether it's too much or too little. Let's see. A couple other little tricks, and then we're just going to talk quickly. We've got 15 more minutes quickly about weather helm, lee helm. Another trick that somebody, I think in Florida, told me at this one of these regattas is how to tape your hatch. Another way to keep water out. This is. I can't take credit for a lot of these things because I think this is pure insanity that somebody ever thought it through this much. But they start at the back. They put the cross piece of tape on the back first, and then work your way forward. And the final one is on the front because you're kind of creating a ramp for the water to go up and over versus a scoop. And it'll find any little crevice, the old water will. So you tape the back first, tape the side second, and tape the front third. And when I started doing that, it probably wasn't coincidental that I haven't had any water since then either. Fun little fact. Again, I didn't think of that. I think that's insane that somebody actually did. Okay. Couple more. So I told you guys that I'm a believer in, first of all, the weather forecast. So if you have what is it, sail flow or whatever, one of these things, if you use the HRRR forecast, there's the grid files that you're going to be really close to spot on for that day of understanding what the breeze is going to be that day. It's incredibly accurate here, especially when I think the sail Newport is down, the little weather station is down here. So you use the Rose Island out front. So if you want to figure out how, should I bring my B rig? Should I have my B rig in the boat? What am I setting my rigs up for that day? I would strongly recommend the HRRR weather forecast. Within, a lot of people look at these weather apps and they say, oh, my windy app says this. All those apps are meaningless unless you go to the correct file within the correct file within that. And it's in the HRR is by far, it's called a high resolution forecast. So it's constantly updating itself, and it's updating itself based on current conditions. So a lot of you are looking at me like I have 6 heads. That's why I've been beating you for all this shit. The next thing I do after I set up the boat, before I come down, I plunk it in the water. And a lot of people have commented on this, is I try to set the boat off the dock going upwind, and I don't touch my transmitter. And that's the quickest way to figure out if I'm dialed in for the day. I'll just let it sail for a while. Now, sometimes if you have your rudder off for some reason, you have to adjust the rudder to make sure that the rudder is centered side to side. So it could be that. It could be the rudder's a little out of kilter and it's heading up on one side versus the other side. So the first thing you do is you judge the rudder placement and whether that's dead nuts in the center. But once you're pretty sure that happens, you should be able to let it go. And if you can't, if it's constantly really quickly feathering itself, get back into the dock and go through one of the many options to be able to change your boat from a windward helm boat to a leeward helm boat to hopefully at the end of the day a neutral helm. So why is neutral helm so important? First of all, these are big, huge rudders, and they're super draggy. They're really not very efficient at all. They're big because they have to be, because they have to maneuver this boat at really slow speeds. So there's not a lot of flow going over the rudder. So they're much bigger than they need to be. So the last thing you want is that thing loaded. It may be loaded by a degree or two, maybe, but loaded by 5 or 6 degrees, and you're stopped. I promise you that is not fast. The second thing is, if your boat can sail itself, you can look at the water. I look around at this group all the time, whether we're on the dock or the wall. I swear to God, I'm the only one looking at the water, because I am totally convinced my boat can sail itself for that given period of time. So if I'm in a little cleared lane, I'm looking at the next wind shift, and everybody else is really concentrating on their boats. So if neutral helm has any advantage, it's that. Just you get to look at the water. And Lord knows, in all the locations that we sail these boats, you're right next to land, and looking at wind shifts it's probably more important than boat speed. It's everything. There's some days where it's absolutely everything. So neutral helm, eyes out of the boat, it's a different world. I'm looking for the next wind shift. I'm reaching to the next wind shift. I'm pointing to the next wind shift. I'm strategically trying to position myself in the fleet. It's all because I think the boat can sail itself. So I'll plunk it in the water and just let it go. And if the thing just is trucking upwind, I'll tack. If the thing's trucking upwind, I'm done. I'm just going to do a couple laps of the race course and start figuring out what the shifts are. But I'm done. I'm pretty sorted. And the more I've learned how to get these adjustments more dialed in and not such big tuning differences from day to day. Because I think it's natural when you first get the boat. Oh, I can do it better. I'm going to pull on way more backstay, and I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this. Well, now it's minimized down. This is actually a pretty short list if you think about it of what you do in the course of a day to get your boat ready. Now that I'm down to such what I consider a short list, it's pretty rare that the boat goes in the water and isn't darn close to being ready. So that's important. I think that's super important. Same thing downwind. If you want to check your rudder, you get the thing upwind of you, you let the boat come downwind at you, take your hands off and see, is the thing just spinning out one way, spinning out the other way? It's probably the rudder. If that's the case, then you got to start the process all over again. But those are the two checks: hands off upwind, hands off downwind. Get your boat to start sailing itself. Then you know how close you are to, and how much fine tuning you have to do before you do anything further. There's a
Question on, when I get it right home, then don't say.
tiny bit. Yeah.
It should be what you.
Oh, I think that's how it's always been. This is my second boat, and they've always had, you flick it one way and it stays a tiny bit that way. You flick it the other way, a tiny bit that way. You just got to keep it in the back of your head. All right, so let's talk about, I think for the most part, the common theme would be too much windward helm. We got 6 minutes. It's too much weather helm. So first things first, are the sheets sorted? Too much windward helm would be too much main sheet in, too much jib sheet out. So windward helm is obviously, oops. So windward helm is obviously the back of the sail plan is too loaded and is twisting, is literally pushing the boat towards the wind. So we're trying to avoid that. I think that's actually not the, lee helm is the worst of all evils, but weather helm is pretty bad because you're constantly feathering. If you take your eyes off for a second, you're feathering, the boat slows down, stands up. You got to overcompensate. So you're just going like this all the time, going upwind. So it's back into the sail plan. Is it outhaul? And in this list, it's pretty easy. Is your backstay too loose? Is your outhaul too loose? And by the way, I think focus on rake. If you're trying to fine tune weather helm or lee helm, rake would be by far the last thing I would worry about, because the rake difference of 2 mil up there is moving the mast. I mean, tiny amount. I wouldn't touch the rake for the day. You know, set it up for where you think the wind condition is going to be for that day, and I wouldn't touch it for the day. I think it's a last ditch effort. Things are desperate at that stage. But this list of too much weather helm is really, it's almost listed from in order of how I would consider going about it. There's several different things here, but think anybody who tells you they can tell you what the order is lying, because every day, every condition is different. Is it waves? Is it puffiness? What is? But anyway, I think I would sheets, just to make sure the sheets are where you want them for the day, where you think they're setting up, and then I'd go from there. Lee helm, I think, is even worse, because lee helm, as soon as you give up your concentration for 1 second and either try to look at the fleet or try to look at the conditions at that puffs in the water, your boat is drifting in the wrong direction. At least weather helm, you're going towards the mark. You're going to slow down pretty quick. Lee helm, you're going away from the mark and you're losing any sort of lane that you may have developed. Lee helm off the steering line is death. You're gonna just fall right into the group to leeward of you. Lee helm is worse evil than weather helm. Weather helm is bad. Lee helm is worse. So again, lee helm, just like weather helm, lee helm means the front of the sail plan is overly loaded up, and if you lose concentration, it's pushing the bow down and away from the wind. There's a list here. This is the list that all came to mind of stuff that I do in the case of lee helm. All I can say is that the twist, the balance, the ability for the boat to sail itself and I think you talk to any good radio control sailor, and they're really keyed in to what makes that boat track. And if you're gonna air, you air on a tiny bit of weather helm. And, you know, I've had days where I've just let it sit with a little bit of weather helm, and I'm literally just bumping. I kind of train myself to bump the rudder every 3 or 4 seconds. So if I'm looking for puffs, I'm actually just bumping it from time to time, knowing that it could be trying to track itself. But for the most part, you're trying to eliminate that and get rid of it, and get this thing sailing straight. Finally, boat handling. So I've never understood it. Somebody will have to explain to me why, but downwind, well, let's show. So downwind, you have 100% of the sail plan, okay? And it's not a big sail plan, but it's a good size sail plan, no spinnaker, no nothing. So you're you need your jib as much as you need your main. So many of you sail by the lee downwind, and when you do, I pass you, I promise. Because you're giving up about 40% of your downwind sail area, but as soon as you go by the lee. So you're trying to go as deep as possible, and you see your jib start to shake a little bit. That means the mainsail is blanketing the jib. Well, guess what? You've just lost 40% of your sail area downwind. So I never go. I'll go by the lee for the last 6 seconds into a leeward mark or something. Even then, I might even jibe. Because you're just giving up sailing. Why give up? Why sail by the lee and have this do nothing when you want to sail with 100% of your sail? So that's the biggest trick of the day. You sail downwind by the lee all the time. Imagine how many races you would have won. Imagine how much less bitching we would have had from you.
It's not many people.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. So that's my big trick of the day. I don't understand it. Somebody's gonna have to explain to me someday if there's other way. I've seen, you know, Brad has a theory that you over twist the main, you do this, like, that's bullshit. You either use the jib or you don't. And I choose to use the jib downwind. Listen, there's really, I think jibing and tacking, jibing is pretty, once you do it, you can roll jibe these boats. You can snap jibe, roll jibes, coming out, accelerate down, just like you would have done in your laser 420 or flying junior or whatever it was when you were in college. There's no question that you can roll jibe these boats if you do it effectively. You just don't have to hold it and try to spin your sails over. It's a little bit of a turn. Sails pop through. You trim them as they're popping through, acceleration, and back down again. So I think there is something to be said for better boat handling than others. So jibing is certainly one of using the jib tack weight. I have it pushed in all the way right now. A lot of people, and I was one of them for a long time, for trying to get the jib to wing and wing, I had the jib weight out quite far. I find that the chances of hooking up on somebody in a crash is accentuated times 50 if those weights are sticking way out. So I've just decided to try to get better at flicking into a wing and wing rather than having that jib weight hang way out there. I think it's personal preference. I've seen a lot of people with them way out, others with them way in. Personal preference, but that's what it's there for. Overpowered downwind, is there a trick? People ask all the time. I don't think there's a trick. I've asked a million people. Some people say, don't go wing and wing. Other people say, go by the lee and try to eliminate. I don't know. If anybody has any tricks, I'm all ears, because I haven't, on these boats, I haven't figured it out. In the IOMs, it was easy. For me, in the IOMs, it was stay dead downwind and use the really full bow to just try to keep the rudder in the water and keep the thing tracking. These things just go bow down pretty quick. I don't know, anybody have any tricks to not wipe out downwind and big breeze?
A couple of things I've learned doing it is when the bow's stopping, just don't touch the rudder, just wait. Because as soon as you touch them, you've lost some under the water. Now, as soon as the rudder stops showing up a bit, you can try to touch it, it creates, rotates, and the boat just spins right out. at least if the rudder's straight, there's a chance that it's still tracking to that direction, or the same direction you kind of want it to go. And as soon as the stern comes down, that's when you can start using the rudder. And if the thing's wagging, if the boat's nose down and you're trying to try and control it, the rudder's not doing anything, you're making it too fast.
There's one. Turn on.
And I'll go with the argument that it's a good time to use a little bit of sail by the lead.
Yeah.
If I see a big gust coming down, I'll kind of get the jib to start fluttering before it hits me, and seems to help a little.
There you go. Let's try it.
She did it the other way as well, like he's up, trying to get the boat going. When it hits, the boat's already got some flow over it. So instead of the bow diving down as it hits the top of the mast, you're already riding it long. And then as soon as the puff hits, you just skim along a little faster. But if you, because trying to go by the lead, all the wind's doing is just hitting the top of the mast and pushing down, bearing it back. So I'm actually eating an up before the puff comes, just to try and get the speed up.
So we've had head up, head down. Top rudder. Just figure it out. Yeah, favorites. Upwind, the only couple of little things. Tacking, I've actually tried to slow my tacks down and gotten in trouble because of it, but there's no question that being at max speed before any tack is super important. You can't be feathered and then roll into a tack. You're risking being in irons. And the second part of it is tacking and breeze. You have to lay the bow down, and you have to let your sheets in coming out of the tack. If you don't, the chances of head to wind and being in irons are enhanced greatly. So it's really kind of like roll jiving. It's a little bit of coordination with your hands, but coming out of attack, you're just automatically easing the sheets out, laying on it, accelerating, and coming back up in a way like you would do in any big boat at the same time. The risk here is, of course, irons. The risk in a big boat is just a slow tap. Let's see. And then we'll talk when Jeff does his quick thing. We're going to talk about having a high mode or a fast mode. I like I said before, I tend to just work the throttle a little bit from it all the way in to all the way out. But I think Jeff's going to show us some tricks on how to use all the other 42 buttons here that I've never actually used before. So anyway, without further ado, why don't we get any more questions? And by the way, like I said, this is here to measure, poke, prod, do whatever you want to do after this session is up. But we'll try to give enough time before we get out on the water, and that's the goal. It's like a golf lesson, right? You get a golf lesson and you're hitting the ball perfectly, and you go out on the course and you've never played worse in your life. So my whole job today is to fuck you guys up as bad as possible.
So Ken, one question, do you ever sail with them different between the main and the jib?
Pretty rare, because I don't want to lose track, frankly. It's pretty rare. I used to. Again, I'm not so sure it makes all that difference, that much difference.
What is that day she said we were fast and we could do a lot.
That was just twisting the main. As soon as I ease the main out a half a turn, and it's really slow downwind, not having enough, just a little. I think it's not even as much twist. It all kind of it comes in line sooner or later, right? Yeah.
Can you comment on your twist of the jib lead relative to the up-haul?
Yeah. So jib twist. This is the hardest. The jib twist relative to the uphaul. So I'm just looking for balance between the two, right? The main and the jib are, for the most part, twisted the same. And I know that's for some reason that phrase bugs me, because I know I look at twists for a living, right? You try to fix people's feet. I don't expect you. It's the only thing that people might want to measure at some stage. And I think some people have. I never have. So I couldn't tell you measurement there, a measurement at the top stripe or a measurement at the bottom stripe off of the mainsail. I couldn't tell you.
You said you have 2 marks on that.
That's it. We'll have to
And
do
my
it.
question is, what is it coming to be?
Oh, no.
Is it 2 centimeters from?
No, it's
No,
it's a
I'm talking about from the fault to the leech.
Yeah.
What on average is it 2 fingers or 2.5 fingers? The twist on the jib.
from there.
Twist on the jib. Nope, higher up, higher up.
Oh,
Right there. What's that?
oh, it's almost 3.
Okay. Is that typically where you are?
Yes, this is, I would say that's really close to where I am. Absolutely. Well, that's it. That's actually a good way of doing it.
That's what I'm talking about, right there.
Oh.
That,
Shut it. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, did we measure your fingers from?
Gotta calibrate my finger. We're on video, settle down. All right, Jeff.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Want to take a break from that?
Just go to the next 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll kind of face the crowd with my radio. Someone like.
Yeah.
I can stand the town.
And the only other thing we could do is move my table closer and I could just have the camera. You just get this camera to like.
This, like, could I just like stand like this, with that table? Yeah, sure.
Then next, you could.
Anyway, tape that to my head.
I'm sure. Yeah, you're on the veranda. Yeah, I think it's comes off.
I need both hands.
Yeah.
Someone else has the bolts. Okay, so as soon as people settle down, I'll.
All right,
Thanks, Greg.
we'll figure it out.
Good, thanks. How are you? No, I did not. I'm not, I'm still in pop. You haven't changed it. I know. When will be a good time for us to get down to go over the step for the.
Yeah. Why don't we do it right after we're done here and then we'll figure out what the details. Sounds good.
Hi, everybody, get up. Get started. Everybody, go down. Hi, everybody. So when you stop, I'm gonna stay here and when you take over the radio. What? Give me everybody ready?
Ready.
Hi, everybody. Boy, tough to follow Kenny. Thanks, Ken. That was awesome. I have nothing to add to anything about sail trim or sailing after that, but I found my way around these radios pretty good, and I noticed a lot of the people sailing are struggling with basic boat handling things, and I think a lot of it might be from lack of having a little bit of setup on their radio. These Flysky radios are incredibly good for their cheapness. I mean, they're very affordable, and it's a 6-channel
controller for airplanes, and we're using only 2 channels to control our little boats. So it's way overkill for what we're doing. The reason they're affordable is because the joysticks or gimbals or whatever are low-cost ones, and that's part of what we're going to overcome with the settings. So first things to know about this radio is we use channel 1 to steer and channel 3 for our sheets, right? We don't really use any of these other buttons most of the time. We have, when this goes up and down, this little button here is a fine tune on what's going on here. So if you have a little bit of rudder imbalance, you can do the same thing here. You can adjust it while you're sailing. Or if you don't like your sheet position slightly, you can adjust it here. Keep in mind that using these buttons is just like moving your joystick. So if you have a rudder imbalance, you can compensate it while you're sailing, but try to fix that mechanically as soon as you can, because you're giving up some of your throw in the other direction because you've compensated for it and you've only got so much range. Okay. Other thing about these things, they will die if they get wet. So buy a cover or have a lot of plastic bags. Tape up this hole in the back where the data cable would go. You're probably never going to use the data cable, but if you ever want to, you're going to be glad that you taped that up because it'll work. And tape your battery cover shut because they always fall off and people have to buy new ones. Okay. So basic settings on this. There's a couple menu items. You have to push the OK button to make the screen come on, and then you push and hold it. And you get to here, and there's 2 menus. There's system and setup. System menu controls the radio, okay? And the setup is for your particular model and how you want the radio to control that model. I'm going to do setup first because it's the one that we care about the most. So I hit the up button. You see setup is highlighted, and I hold it down or push it, all right? So we're going to start with reverse, and you okay, let me get back to here.
Can you do it?
Okay, so when your radio is in this mode,
Put on the projector so you see.
yeah, I can project. All right, we'll take the short one second.
The way that was going, Buster was going, one was gonna learn.
I got it.
Anyway, so it might be 6. Up to you. But that way you don't have it. Okay, the camera's in, they take it right. No. Side. You go to the side over here. Over here, then it's
Okay, that's even worse. Yeah.
But you don't need to set that, it's straight into that.
Okay. Hello. Oh, look at that. Sarah? Okay, so to get into the menus, what we're gonna do, we're gonna push OK once, just makes the light come on. We'll push OK again to get into the menus. We're gonna hit the up menu to get to setup. We're gonna hit OK, and this brings us to setup menu. You use the up and down arrow to pick the thing you want to change. Everybody probably, if they haven't done it themselves, someone did it for them. Everybody needs to know how to use reverse. What reverse does is it changes the direction of the servo relative to the joystick. Channel 1, if it's not reversed, your boat's going to steer like you're holding a tiller, and most people don't like that. So you reverse that. I have channel 3 reversed because I have the newer gray orange winch. You have to reverse it for that winch. If you have the old blue winch, you leave that the way it normally is. One of the weirdest things about these radios, when you want to, first to switch to which channel you're controlling, you toggle, you cycle through them with the OK. One of the weirdest things about these radios, you change the value with the up and down button, and you say, OK. Well, that didn't save anything. I think it's something that got lost in translation. To make that, see, if I go out of here, or if I turn my radio off and back on, that setting didn't last. To make a setting last, you have to hold the cancel button till it makes that beep. So it's very counterintuitive that cancel means save. Right now, if I go back in, that channel 2 got reversed, doesn't matter, we don't use channel 2. Okay, so everybody should know that basic function. Endpoints is the next basic control. The endpoints control how far the servo will go for any given extreme joystick position. So if you push your joystick all the way over there, it'll go to whatever that endpoint is, the servo setting. To change which one you want to set, this is not very obvious. You have to, channel 1 left, I push it left. If I want to change the channel 1 right, I push it right. Now, if you're looking at this, you're probably saying, why would he have 120, 103? Well, the reality is these joysticks aren't that great. And my particular radio, which is like 3 years old, the far left doesn't work very well. So I bumped that up to 120% because the reality is when I go that far, that's about all I'm going to get. All right. So, and I'll show you how to figure that out in a few minutes. And then on channel 3, I do have the newer winch. You'll notice I have a lot less throw here on channel 3. With the blue winch, I was close to a minus 100, 100. I found to get the same amount of throw on the main boom, these numbers worked with the modern winch. Okay, so you'll want to play with your endpoints. You can also play with these day to day. If you set your boat up and say your sheets are a little too tight or a little too loose, you can change the endpoints on channel 3 and fix that without having to adjust the boat. Okay, so we're going to get out of here. That's endpoints. I mentioned I'll show you how to figure out what's not working right. I use the display all the time. With the display will show you what your radio is sending to the boat. So when I go full right joystick, it's putting full left rudder on, right? When I go full that way, it's putting full right rudder on. And you can see that I have about the amount of the two things, even though my endpoints were set really weird, and it's because my joystick's no good and I want to buy a new radio. Okay. You can do this for every channel, like channel 3, you can see where your sheets go, right? And then we don't use these other channels, but you could see I could play with channel 6 or channel 5. Well, don't worry, it doesn't matter. We're not going to use those. Okay. So use the display when you're setting your radio up to see the effect of what you've done. You don't need to look at your boat. You don't need to go sail your boat. Just look at this display. All right. We don't really have any use for the auxiliary channels. The sub trim, you could use. The sub trim is basically like a bigger version of these little side buttons. And if you had some big imbalance in your rudder, you might use the sub trim, but honestly, I don't know anybody who does use sub trim. The next one is a really important one. This dual rate thing makes the output of your radio relative to the joystick non-linear. Okay, and you can do that on these radios on channels 1, 2, and 4. And we use channel 1 for our rudder. So this is the one you're going to want to do. The first thing you're going to want to do is get down to the exponent. And when you get your boat new, that exponent is going to be 0. And it's going to be a straight line like that. So that means If you move this a tiny 1%, the rudder's gonna move 1%. And the reality is for these little boats with these giant rudders, that's a way overkill, right? So you decrease or you increase the exponent to make that thing look. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. I was right the first time. You decrease it to make that thing as least sensitive in the center of the joystick as possible. I mean, some people stop at -70. I go all the way to -100. And you'll see this curve is really flat in the middle. And if we,
What's that doing for you again?
so what that does is we'll go back to the display, right? So you'll see when I move my joystick a little bit, I get very little output out of it. So I can move my joystick almost a centimeter and I'm only getting 1 or 2 degrees of rudder movement. So even though weather helm sucks, right? Sometimes it's there and you have to deal with it. And if you try to steer a boat that has a linear curve with your thumb, you're going to be all over the place. But if you have this set very desensitive, you can put a tiny bit of rudder in and keep your boat going with a little bit of rudder, weather helm. Okay. Again, use the display to see what your outputs look like.
The rate never changes. It's just the.
Right. And then let me go back to that.
It's present whole cancel.
By the way, I have.
Okay, what?
Cancel, say, whatever, right?
Yeah, yes.
Tried mine at -100 and I couldn't stand it. So.
Okay. So everybody's going to have difference.
It's just different. Yeah, it just, everything's so slow. You had to really use a lot of motion. Yeah, yeah, I'm using half. Yeah, that amount.
Use 50.
50, yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing on this display is the rate. And the rate is basically how far on the y-axis these curves end. And it's going to be a multiplier of whatever you set in your endpoints. So like my left joystick is 100 minus 120%. I have this set to 85, so it's going to be 85% of 120. You don't need to know the number, just know that if it works for you.
So why would you have that anything other than 100?
I don't know. It's just how I ended up. I played with the two, and once they worked, I left them alone. Well,
Theoretically.
you could. Right. But you could do the same thing with your endpoints.
Sometimes I've seen, you can throw the rudder over and then it gets locked past 90 degrees.
Yeah.
It's all screwed up, so that might be something to help with that.
Well, I guess this would do both at once.
Right. So I'll come back later. There is a way you can have multiple curves for your steering, but we'll come back to that. I want to get to the throttle curve. So I mentioned that auxiliary rate, that exponential rate thing works on channels 1, 2, and 4. You notice your joystick for throttle for your sails is considered a throttle. That one doesn't self-center, so it works slightly different. So there's a different setting for that. And this one, you have 4 data points that you can create a custom curve. And you'll see. I'm on, all right.
Curve.
Yeah, so when you first go into the setup menu, it looks like the dual rate is the last thing, but if you keep going down, there's a lot more settings underneath that. So we're going to get the throttle curve. And this one you set individually, like my lowest setting, if I wanted to change that to something less than 0%, I just go up or down, right? And you have, I guess, 5 positions you can set, and you can create the curve by putting in the percentage of the sheet you want for each one of those settings. So you can see my curve is radical. What this does is, let me go to the display. You can see that I move my joystick to the middle and my sheet didn't go out very far, right? it didn't, I mean, it didn't go all the way out. It's still in the bottom half. It's like I'm still going upwind, even though the joystick's in the middle. When I'm way down here, I can make very minor adjustments to my main sheet. And I use that if I want to get into a foot mode, or if I'm already in foot mode and I want to get to point mode. You can make very small adjustments. If you don't play with that throttle curve, it's going to be very, very hard to make small adjustments. I mentioned that here are my settings. I know only one person that has their first position even lower than 5%. I think most people would find that very desensitive. I like it that way. Okay. No matter of taste, this one you're going to want to, you can use the display, but this one you're going to want to put your boat in the water and go play with it when you set it to see what you find where you really like. Okay. This is mine. If anybody wants to look at these numbers, I go 5, 10, 30, 100. And what that happens is at the top end, from like here to here, my main goes from like 30 degrees out to 100% out. So it just dumps it. And that's fine for upwind and pre-start.
10, 20, 60, 100 is mine.
Your L is
No, sorry, 0, 10, 20, 60, 100.
So there's the next one down is mix. No use for us. If you're a helicopter pilot, you might like that. We don't use this setting. The V-tail we don't use. Switches assign is if you want to do anything a little fancier with your radio, you might want to use one of these 4 switches to control a setting. You can see I actually broke one of mine, but you only need 2. When you go into here, for fly mode, because this is for a plane, fly mode refers to your rudder control. And I assign switch D, they go A, B, C, D. I assign switch D to the fly mode, and you'll see if I flip it, it changes to sport. When we go back to that other display where that exponent auxiliary rate thing is set, if you flip this switch, okay. Let me go back out. All right, let me. It's way down and below throttle curve. Switch is assigned.
Okay, switches, sorry.
Okay. You go in there, and the first fly mode again refers to what we use for our rudder. And you can have 2 curves, one for normal and one for sport. I actually have a sport mode, which is even less. It's even deader. I changed, I think, that endpoint from -85, and this is actually an answer for you, Ken, why I have that thing not 0. Because I have 2 curves and my other curve only goes to like 60. Because when it's really, really nuky, I use sport mode downwind so that I don't accidentally give the boat too much rudder and it wipes out.
What does sport mode mean?
It's just an alternative to what channel 1 does.
Quicker, slower?
It's whatever you want it to be. So when you go, let me go back to this, right? Let me show you guys something. So if we go up here to my throttle curve, right?
But don't do it.
If we go up to my throttle curve, I have switch D tied to sport mode, right? When I switch that, oh, I'm in the wrong, sorry, channel 1, it's auxiliary. Watch, when I switch this, the curve changes. All right, so you can have different rudder modes for different conditions.
So a word of caution on this is that you can do this and have multiple curves and all that. But then you're out there on the dock and you've knocked it and you don't realize that you're in sport mode or not. So if you're focused on knowing where all those switches are, then great.
Right.
But if you're not, it might be better not to do this. So as I say, I tried it and it did not work well for me.
So the other thing in the switches assign, you'll see that idle mode, I have the switch A, which is this one on here. Idle mode, remember our sheet is controlled by a throttle. So idle mode gives you a secondary throttle curve, right? So you can see here it goes from normal to idle up. And I guess with airplanes, they have an idle up mode until the motor gets warm. right? So we go back to throttle curve. You can see this is my my default upwind throttle curve. I use my second setting for a downwind mode. You see the curve is exactly opposite, and I find this useful downwind on light days or on offset legs where you're trying to do a lot of reaching and you're trying to get that sail set right between like the 45 and 90-degree setting. With my extreme upwind settings, I could never do that. So I use this in reaching conditions. Penny mentioned that you could use this to switch from pinch to foot mode. If you wanted to do that, what you would do is you would have two curves that both look like upwind curves, but you'd change L, say you wanted a foot mode, right? You'd change L to be not so far. Oh, I changed one by accident, but.
So this is all good. How much do you cost per hour to do all this shit for us?
And so, well, let me say this to follow up on what Buster said. If you're not comfortable making changes at marks and keeping track of what your settings are, then don't do it, right? I mean, I'm used to playing PlayStation and stuff like this, and it just comes natural to me, right? So, and I did say at the beginning, I was going to focus on setup. There's one thing in the system menu that I wanted to show everybody. When you go into the system menu, model select, these radios can have up to 20 sets of settings. So if you could have multiple settings for your boat, or you could have multiple boats. If you want to talk to me later about that, we'll talk about it. There's really don't need to go into that, any of this stuff, but we want to go into RX setup. RX setup has this thing called fail safe. And this controls what your receiver in the boat is going to do if it loses connection to your transmitter. So this is important because we try to set our boats up to be perfectly balanced. Like Ken said, he puts his boat in the water and it just sails away. Well, if he wasn't paying attention, somebody started yakking with him, his boat would sail all the way across the harbor or up onto the rocks. So if you lose connection with the boat, it's going to do that as well. So what you do with your fail-safe is you set something in channel 1 and channel 3. And for me, I have my rudder 72% to one side and the sheet minus 62%. So you'll watch my boat. Right, so it's trimmed in really nice and tight. The rudder's on center. If I turn my radio off, ease the sails and the rudder kicked out. That way, if you lose a connection to your boat, it's just going to sit there and make circles until someone gets it, or you reestablish your radio connection. So I highly recommend that everybody set a fail-safe on their radio.
Where was I?
All right, we'll do it one more time. Okay, you go into the menus. When you go into system, and then you scroll down to RX setup, and then in RX setup, you go to fail safe, and then you set for channel 1 and channel 3, whatever you want, but something other than 0. Because if you lose connection to the boat, you don't want it to sail away.
You adjust the percentage. Once you're in sales.
You'd use the up and down buttons. Oh, no, you use OK and then the up and down buttons. Or, I take that back, Tommy. It's been a while since I do this. You actually put the joystick where you want and then hold the cancel button.
That,
Of course. Yeah. Because cancel means save.
Jeff, can you just talk about the marks that you have on your deck for your
Okay, yeah. So in addition to the sail trim marks that Brad developed, the one really important mark, and that is to have a reference mark on your deck for your sheet position. Because inevitably, at some point, you're going to break an elastic and your sheet's going to unspool, right? Or you're going to change your winch and you're going to have to replace it, or you're going to re-rig your boat and your sheets aren't going to be the same. So in a perfect world, my clip would go right to my line, right? But the reality is when I set up my new winch, I didn't get it just right. I didn't want to mess with my sheets. So, but I know that my default position now is about a centimeter in front of my line. You need something to know where your baseline is. Because when you change, the other thing is if you have multiple rigs, make sure that you use your baseline of one rig to set your sheets on your other rig. So if you have to go from A to B, you don't have to mess with, your radio or anything else because the sheets are different. Make sure all your rigs are trimmed the same.
But Jeff, so that mark on the deck plus your throw percentage in your controller is gonna set how far your main goes out and in, so. Yeah, your endpoint.
And if someone could bring the camera over here, there's one more thing about these radios. That my boat's taped up and I don't want to open it up, but you can see my antennas, I have one antenna under the deck right here. And the other antenna Velcro to the front of the box right there. It's a very important, antennas are 90 degrees and very as close to the deck as possible. You want them 90 degrees, so at no point is it 300 feet away from you and both antennas are lined up and you have no cross section. Right, so that's your radio signals based on cross section. And you want them close to the deck, obviously, so they're not below the surface of the waves. That's the only thing I can say about installing the radio.
Nice work.
And anybody have any questions, you can talk to me anytime on the dock or here.
There are some great resources online for radio stuff. I'll try and post some on the website. I found a few. But remember that those switches can be brutal if you're like in pinch modes.
The other thing is, most of your boats came with this easy startup guide, which pretty much has everything you need. And if you really want to go nuts like me, you can find this online. It's on the International Class site, or I can email it to someone because I download it. But this is a full user manual.
Should be any.
And I don't know anything about anybody else's radius.
This is the standard.
Still choice for them. Either gets have them.
So somebody else can.
Yeah. Okay,
The selection on C, that's the Joyce Wave radio, which comes with that, you get a book of the radio. The just what I recommend is pretty much the version on these, you get it without the radio, and then you just go out and buy the radio, $50, because they charge you $40 for it.
That's what I just in Sweden, and it was super easy to install. So like that.
Does anyone have a different radio than the Flysky here? So show people your radio, tell them about it.
Okay, for me, I have pretty severe hand tremors. So for the steering, I had to modify it, take the spring out. But the trigger is in on the saddle, this is the steering. So I can raise my hand against this. I make a subtle steering change. Now we have to down there. Exponentials down 50%. That spring it. I have to spring out. And then what I had to go through and clean. I have these rubber things, yes, so you might go in any position.
One much. Yes.
Steering. Cool.
Then it's here, and there's all this downstream, when I get out. Like his, like that.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap with 5 minutes from Jim on measuring, because we've got a regatta coming up here, April 6, 7, Saturday, Sunday. Registration's live on newportmodelsailingclub.org. And Jim, there's a handout here. We'll also post it on the website, but take it away.
For the inspection for the regatta, it's very straightforward with regards to what's legal and what's not legal. The handout is important. I got this from Russ Gardner, the secretary. And probably the most important thing is a template will be here. If you have a homemade sail, it will be measured off the template. All sails that are made by a manufacturer will not be measured because they always measure in. The thing that has shown up with regards to non-compliance is the setup that they hired. The DF95, there's 2 separate bowsies that hand go up and the headstead. For the 95, I don't know why they did this, because the load is greater. We only have 1,000, so that load is on the luck as well as the headstead. This is the proper setup. So if you had a DF65 first, and then you bought this, you're probably gonna rig it that way, so you gotta do this. Other than that, everything is on this information sheet. Anybody have any questions regarding what's legal and what's, Windex is illegal. Anything that goes beyond the sale plan, any telltales that are off the leash, is illegal. You know, these are not performance enhancing things either. So locally, what we do is, it's important for us to be able to see the boat. So, you know, we let some things slide with regards to visibility, but that's it. Any questions?
What's the ruling on having two boats in it?
You can't do it.
Can't do, so it has a backup in case.
Backup is a different, if you break down, it's,
But you can't like have a rig on one boat. B on
No,
another.
no.
Okay,
and actually I've done that locally, but for a sanctioned event, you can't do it. But you know, for club events, nobody minds. It's called the Reed Bear rules. Reed Bear rules, yeah. Yeah, I think it's slow. So drive, when you drive an hour and a half, it's just absolutely.
But you guys make sure things like, sale numbers. Not calling out or anything, but sale numbers gotta be 100 mil. It's gotta be the same sale number on the jib as on the main, need sale numbers on both sales. Silly little things like that. I think those are the things that they'll be sticklers about. This, again, this is for fun. I don't understand how a boat sails with all that windage on the top of the mast, frankly, so we might be doing you a favor.
I don't remember that I have no visual memory. Memory, I will lose my vote if I don't take it.
That's why locally, for us, we would never have a problem with that.
Yeah, exactly.
But for you know, regional regatas, they do have a problem.
But if I can apply it as a handicap race, it's considered.
Absolutely,
Sure.
absolutely. It's not a problem. It's just not a speed enhancing. Any questions? How many people? So I'm gonna go, this says this information in this is gonna be on our website. It's important.
what's you painting? You paint your bulk, right?
Yes,
But what's the like,
they've got to be the same finish that came with yours.
just gloss finish?
Yeah. Which mine is not, but
The painted bulb is really great for seeing if you have seaweed on your boat. It's very helpful.
right.
Gloss.
How many people are registered for our I should say, how many people are not? No. Nobody registered.
All right, great. All right, we're gonna get racing. I'm not in charge of the marks. Hopefully Matt and some other people are. Let's go sailing. So get your boats ready to go and we'll make it happen. All right.